Hi everyone, welcome to Reason with Science. I'm your host Jitendra. This discussion is with Andy Norman, who has a PhD in philosophy. Andy works on cognitive immunology. He has written interesting books, and latest one is Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy directs a Humanism Initiative at CIRCE, the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative. In this discussion, we talk about why do we need mental immunity, importance of belief system, need of religion, importance of scientific method, good and bad ideas, and how to attain mental immunity. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Thank you for listening. Okay, hi Andy, welcome to today's discussion.
Hello, Jitendra. Thank you.
Yeah, so of course we are right now in a pandemic, and during the pandemic, a lot of people, they were talking about, of course, immunity, pandemic, viruses, parasites, and then here you are a philosopher talking about immunity. So how did this happen? About how did you reach to a point that you want to talk and work on mental immunity?
Yeah, well, I was working on this long before COVID showed up on the scene. I've been thinking about how bad ideas spread through human populations for a long time. And I realized back in the early 1990s that the spread of bad information can be modeled using the tools of epidemiology. So bad information can spread through a population of minds the same way a dangerous parasite can spread through a population of bodies. And just as COVID or smallpox can be deadly, I think bad information can also be deadly. And in our hyper-connected, internet-connected world, we're watching harmful information spread in alarming ways. And I think there's a new science emerging that can help us understand this phenomena, or I should say these phenomena, and help us develop better ways to prevent infodemics from harming us, our individual minds, and harming us collectively.
Right. So of course, there are now different terms of mental immunity that we can talk about. And to give this big concept, of course, we need to understand what are ideas, what are beliefs, what are ideologies, right? But then maybe first we can start with a global reasoning. Can there be a method of global reasoning in humanity?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we can all think of examples of reasoning that seem quite clearly correct, and other times when reasoning misfires to lead to false conclusions or to reinforce mistaken ideas. So the trick is, how do you reason properly so that your mind doesn't fill up with distorted information, or so that your mind doesn't construct a distorted worldview. I think there are scientifically respectable ways to address this problem. The criteria scientists use to distinguish good ideas from bad ideas are by no means controversial. Truth is universally regarded as a good quality in an idea. Falsehood is universally recognized as a bad quality in an idea. Being well evidenced is good, being poorly evidenced is bad. Being useful or helpful or beneficial, those are good qualities in an idea. Being useless or harmful, those are bad qualities in an idea. And nobody who is honest and well-meaning will dispute any of those claims. The challenge comes when we try to weigh all of those up and come to a conclusion about whether an idea is worth relying on. And I argue in the book that we need to be paying attention not just to truth and falsehood, not just to evidence or its lack. We also need to be paying attention to the practical implications of our ideas, because sometimes they can harm us and the people we love.
Right. Well, in the whole reasoning explanation, I see that you didn't mention once the word belief. Why is that? So why belief is not part of reasoning?
I'm happy to use the word belief. I didn't avoid it for any particular reason. I speak a lot about belief in the book. So I think of belief as when you rely on an idea to the point where it becomes habitual, that's essentially belief. So belief is a mental tendency to rely on an idea. And because our beliefs have big implications, not just for our personal well-being, but also for the well-being of the people around us, I think we have ethical obligations with regard to belief formation and belief updating, belief maintenance, that are not commonly recognized. So we talk a lot about our rights to believe and our rights to our opinions, but we talk very little in our culture about our responsibilities with regard to belief formation. And I think that creates a dramatically imbalanced cultural ethos where many of us feel entitled to indulge in irresponsible believing. I think some such believing is religious in nature, some of it is secular in nature. There are irresponsible political beliefs all across the political spectrum from left to right. And the idea that you're entitled to whatever your core political or religious or ethical convictions are has turned us into an entire generation, I think, of cognitive adolescents who are refusing to grow up and recognize our cognitive responsibilities. And so in the book, I try to explain why we need to take our game to the next level and become more responsible thinkers and believers.
Right. That's for sure. We really need to do that. But before that, I think belief need probably a bit more attention, because if I say that, okay, if I wake up in the morning and I say that I'm going to work, to do my science, my research, because I believe in it, I'm doing it. At the end, I also get paid so I get money. Again, I believe in something there. So I think it's again more than that. So the point is what belief is in general and what it gives. For example, is it like, are we sort of built to believe in something, or this is how we function?
Yeah, I certainly think the evidence is quite strong that human beings dislike doubt and uncertainty. And so we often latch on to beliefs. But the formation of beliefs can help us navigate the world. So if I have a belief about where the edge of the cliff is, and it's an accurate belief, that can be highly adaptive, right? If I believe there are predators in the underbrush and that leads me to flee and stay alive, I'm more likely to pass my genes on to future generations. So beliefs are really important for human survival. And shared beliefs in a group turn out to have a very important effect on group solidarity. So groups often form around and rally around shared beliefs, and a tribal identity can become an overriding force in a person's belief system. The problem comes when you latch onto a set of beliefs because it satisfies your identity or solidifies your standing within a group, and then evidence comes along suggesting that you actually need to change your mind. Then the question is, what do you do, right? Do you cling to your beliefs and reject the evidence? Or do you accept the evidence and change your mind. I argue in the book that the temptation to hang on to our beliefs, to jealously guard them and protect them, is one of the most dangerous tendencies on the planet, and that we need to unlearn stubborn, tenacious believing, and we need to learn a more flexible approach to modifying our beliefs as the evidence accumulates.
Yes. And so of course, then apart from belief, there are other things which basically they are enemy of reason, we can say. One example is, again, cognitive bias. So we have those biases, right? So how does that work?
Yeah, so biases are a term that psychologists, biases are a phenomenon that psychologists have devoted a lot of time and research to in recent decades. I guess a bias is a tendency of mind that often leads to misbelief or mistaken opinions or maladaptive behaviors. So one of the most widely researched is called confirmation bias. So we all like to be proven right. Nobody likes to be proven wrong. So it turns out that almost all of us are on the lookout for confirming information that makes us look and feel correct. And we tend to overlook and downplay disconfirming information or falsifying information because there's an emotional cost associated with having to change your mind. So confirmation bias exercises a very big influence on our beliefs and often leads us to cling to the wrong beliefs. And understanding this about yourself, understanding this about your own mind, can loosen up your belief system and make you, I think, more open to persuasion. And that's on the whole a very good thing.
And how is it different from motivated reasoning?
Yeah, motivated reasoning and confirmation bias are very closely connected phenomena. And I'm not entirely clear on the difference, but here's at least part of how I distinguish the two. You can be motivated to accept something that you don't believe yet. So confirmation bias always works to solidify the beliefs you have, whereas motivated reasoning can actually push you maybe harder than you should be pushed to change your mind. So that's one difference. Think about the fact that whenever we consider a complex subject, we look at several considerations, maybe some for and some against, and then often we kind of decide on what the balance of those considerations is, and then we cease inquiring, we cease investigating, because we have other things to do, so we turn our attention elsewhere. So if you latch on to a consideration that makes you feel like you're right, and then say, okay, I guess I'm right, I can quit investigating now. The act of ending the inquiry can be motivated. It can be motivated by the need to get on to the next task in your life. It can be motivated by the need to resolve the issue so that you feel like you're right. It can be motivated by your need to fit in with your other members of your tribe. And the point is that the motivations can vary, don't have to be truth-based, or they don't even have to be truth-conducive. They can often be motivated by forces that distort or corrupt the truth. And when we understand that about ourselves, we can also be more humble and more open to recognizing our cognitive defects.
Right. Yes. So the other thing is being that, because of course there is cognitive bias or motivated reasoning, but willful unreason, for example, and willful belief. So what are these two terms?
Yeah, you've picked out one of the main themes of my book. I think if you learn to believe things because you want them to be true, I think that's a very dangerous thing. So the evidence on this is now pretty overwhelming. That if you're taught, for example, that it's okay to indulge in wishful thinking about Santa Claus, or indulge in wishful thinking about the tooth fairy, or indulge in wishful thinking about, God is going to protect you against everything that might happen to you. If you're taught that that's a good thing to do, or that it's even that it's virtuous to do those things, then you're more likely to indulge in wishful thinking on other matters that might affect the well-being of others. So suppose half of humanity decided not to believe in climate change because it's too scary. And that's a terrible reason to turn your back on the problem, right? But there's a very strong emotional rationale for doing precisely that. So it's easy to indulge in the kind of wishful thinking that makes you blind to reality. So imagine you've heard the expression, the ostrich that puts its head in the sand. Now, I don't think ostriches really put their heads in the sand, but apparently they can sometimes put their heads way down low next to the ground. And the expression came up, the idea of an ostrich burying its head in the sand has come to be a metaphor for creatures that basically close their eyes and ignore reality. So imagine the ostrich who is so alarmed by the sight of an oncoming predator that they simply bury their head in the sand so they don't have to be distressed by the sight of the oncoming predator. That might give the ostrich a few minutes of relief from emotional distress, but it's also very likely to end the ostrich's life. So some forms of wishful thinking, of sticking your head in the sand, are hugely maladaptive, even though they have a short-term benefit. So we need to understand when we're indulging in irresponsible believing for the sake of its short-term psychological or social benefits. And we need to be more open to we need to pay more attention to the long-term costs and damage that such wishful thinking can cause. I think to be responsible believers, you have to unlearn the habit of wishful thinking, of wishful believing.
Right. Well, I think one segment of the society where we see that people, they don't want to unlearn something, which is religion, of course. But before we talk about religion, let's talk about scientific method in general, because so how a scientific method can help in learn or unlearn, and in general to improve the reasoning in the society.
Yeah, I have a good friend, Lee McIntyre, who wrote a book called The Scientific Attitude. And he argues that what makes science distinctive is not that it has some esoteric approach to proving things. The real secret to scientific thinking is to be willing to change your mind when evidence comes along and demonstrates the need for belief revision, or for a revision of your confidence levels. So what you end up learning when you study science is the mental habit of updating your worldview just a little. Oftentimes it's just a little. New information comes in, it surprises you a little bit. The fact that that information is surprising means that your expectations misled you. So you have to go and find the source of those expectations which misled you and adjust your confidence levels so that next time you're less likely to be caught by surprise. That's how skilled scientists continually update their worldview. And anybody can learn this. You don't need a degree in science. You don't need a lab coat to do this. It just requires a little bit of practice. Um, there's some marvelous experiments being done that compare people's ability to forecast the future and predict events on the political stage, scientific stage. And what they show is that the people who develop educated guesses about the likelihoods of things and then continually update those likelihoods based on new information to develop a more and more refined estimate of the odds, they tend to outperform the rest of us on prediction tasks to an extraordinary degree. But any of us can learn what they're so good at, and it can help us become lifelong learners with much more accurate pictures of how the world works.
Exactly. I mean, yes. So for scientific method, you may not need a white lab coat, but you may need a book from Andy Norman, Mental Immunity.
Well, I do think my book can help with that.
Exactly.
And my friend Lee McIntyre's The Scientific Attitude is another wonderful resource there.
Exactly. Yeah. So about the willful unreason, which we were talking about, and the religion in general. So one incident that you mentioned, which is this debate, and I am also a survivor of that debate between Ken Ham and Bill Nye. Let's mention that. And your conclusion was on spot. I think that highlighted the major point of that debate.
Thank you. Shall I tell the story?
Yes, that'll be good.
Yeah, so back in 2014, a young Earth creationist named Ken Ham. So young Earth creationists are Christians who believe that that God created the world sometime in the last 10,000 years. And that the story is best understood with a literal reading of the Bible's account of Genesis. So the opening book of the Bible is called Genesis, and it tells the story of the creation of the universe. And young Earth creationists want to interpret that story literally and understand it as the scientific truth. So Ken Ham was one of two participants in this debate held in Petersburg, Kentucky. And he defended the literal truth of the Genesis account of creation. And his counterpart on the other side of the issue was the TV celebrity Bill Nye, the science guy. And Nye argued that the Genesis account of the world's origins is scientifically untenable. So apparently millions of people tuned into this debate online. It became there was a bit of a media sensation about it. Sounds like you might have watched the event, or
I watched it later.
Watched it later?
Yeah.
I remember gathering with a group of students and we watched it together. Most of us were more sympathetic with Bill Nye's side of the debate. But a key moment happened in the debate where, in the question and answer period, the moderator asked both men, said, "Gentlemen, what would it take to change your mind?" And Bill Nye said, didn't bat an eye. She said, "Evidence. Give me evidence and I will change my mind." And because they were also talking about evolution, Darwinian account of evolution, he gave some examples of how evidence would force some pretty dramatic changes in evolutionary theory if such evidence ever came to light. So with this answer, I think Bill Nye was exemplifying the scientific attitude, his openness to learning new things, which is a great virtue in the world of science, as you know. Now, and then Ken Ham, his turn came to answer the same question. And his reply was quite telling. He said, "What would change my mind? Nothing. Nothing will ever convince me that the word of God is not true." So given an opportunity to display the extent of his open-mindedness, Ken Ham doubled down on his stubborn lack of open-mindedness and made a sort of a tenacious avowal of his faith. And it was a tenacious avowal willing to flout the norm at the very heart of science. And in the book, and when you flout that norm, you damage it. You damage its capacity to enlighten you, and you can damage that norm's power to enlighten others. And I think that's what Ken Ham was doing in that debate. In the book, I argue that that same norm is critical not just to science, not just to learning. It's critical to all reality-based problem solving, and it's critical to conflict resolution. When two people have a difference of opinion and they want to work out their differences in dialogue, they need a fulcrum that they can use to compel belief change on the other side. And the fulcrum at the heart of resolution-oriented dialogue is the idea that if I have the better reason, you're supposed to change your mind. But of course, if you have the better reason, I agree to change my mind. That's the only way dialogue can work. And if we trash that norm to preserve our religious identity or our secular identity, we end up harming civilization in, I think, a really profound way. So in the book, I call for a renewed commitment to this norm at the very heart of civilized existence. I call it reason's fulcrum. And the fulcrum basically says, I will submit to the force of the better reason. I will not insist and willfully defy the evidence or the better reason. I will yield to better reasons. I think this is the most civilizing norm of all time. I think Bill Nye was exemplifying that norm beautifully. And I think Ken Ham was defying it in a way that can only harm our children and grandchildren.
Exactly. So to pick up on that last line, that this can harm our children and grandchildren. So that sentence itself says that it's immoral to do this. And when we really connect morality with reasoning in general, with your ideologies, with your belief system, then it becomes, that I think an important part of the society, right? That if you want to hold on to your beliefs, you need to think of also the society to be a moral person as well.
And another way, just to emphasize that point, we should not think of our beliefs as things that are ours to use just for a private benefit. Our beliefs have effects on the well-being of others. So we should try to curate belief systems that are, generally speaking, beneficial to all. And I think we have a moral obligation to do that.
Exactly. Yes, but still religion exists, and it's also our, like, as a scientist, as the responsible people, we need to find out the reasons why it exists. So what is the reason behind the success of religion?
The reason behind the substance of religion, was that the word you used?
Why religion exists. What is the reason behind the success of religion?
Success of religion. Okay, yes, that's a nice question. So I think religions meet very real psychological and social needs, emotional needs. Each and every one of us needs to belong. Belonging is one of the deepest needs human beings have. Each of us needs to feel validated and accepted by others. And religions have a long history of providing for these needs by providing congregations and fellowship. That's an admirable aspect of religion, and I don't want to detract from it. When religions bring people together and they find comfort in each other's company, they're doing a good thing. But when they invent metaphysically impossible things to cement those relationships and to create tribal solidarity, I think we're playing with fire. We end up doing something that ends up harming us in the long run. So imagine a world where anybody who wanted to could accept their principles, their articles of faith. The world would divide into mutually irreconcilable tribes, incapable of resolving their differences through reason. To me, humanity has experimented with that way of organizing human thought and human community before, and it led to an utterly disastrous period of European history called the Wars of Religion, where Catholics and Protestants were deeply divided and busy murdering each other by the hundreds of thousands. Over a century of religious warfare eventually convinced Europeans that faith was not such a good idea after all. And that was the origin of the period in Western civilization that we call the Enlightenment, the philosophy that put reason and science at the center of moral existence grew up in the Enlightenment as a response to this disastrous period of extreme faith. And it rescued us from the Dark Ages. And right now, I think the world today is beginning to fracture into irreconcilable tribes that are incapable of reasoning together productively. And it's a very dangerous situation that could lead us into a second Dark Age. So what you're doing, Jitender, by celebrating reason and science and teaching people how important they are, that's really important work, because we need humanity to wake up to the deep usefulness and humanity of reasoning together to overcome our differences. And reason doesn't have to be thought of as a cold, dispassionate taskmaster. Reason can be viewed as a deeply compassionate, collaborative exercise where we really listen to each other and learn from one another. And reason understood in that social way as a warm, affirming, life-enhancing thing is something we need to get back to celebrating and practicing, each and every one of us.
Exactly. And this is what when I think, and because of course a lot of people, they say that through religion and faith you get that comfort side of life. But then more and more I think that is it really true? Because if it goes to so much extremism, and that it's less bendy in general, I don't know whether really it makes people happy, or it's something more which probably that the happiness can be just the socialization in general, that people they come together for X thing. It can be also science or for reason, basically, right?
There's some really interesting research on this. Religious people are on average, at least in America, I believe the study might have been in America, but religious people are on average a little bit happier than non-religious people. But it turns out that if you control for whether the people meet regularly with others, that the difference vanishes. So the effect, so religion's benefit, psychological benefits, is mediated by the fact that it just brings people together. So if you come together around a shared love of football, or a shared love of bowling, or a shared love of literature, that can give you everything religious involvement can give you without compelling you to believe implausible things and exacerbate human tribalism. So yes, solidarity, fellowship, belonging, those make very important contributions to human happiness, but you don't have to go to a church to meet those needs. Some church, I don't want to make the claim that I don't think all religions are evil. I think many religions are very well-intentioned attempts to bring out the best in people. But I think you put your finger on it, Jitendra. Sometimes the world's most seductive religions provide a short-term emotional or psychological boost, comfort, as you put it, but often result in longer-term psychological and social problems. So people of faith are more likely to suffer crises of faith. Secular people learn not to rely on articles of faith, and so they don't suffer crises of faith in the same way. But if you pin your hopes and you're on wildly implausible metaphysical assumptions, you're going to have periods of doubt that shake you to your foundations. But there's an alternative. You don't have to pin your hopes and your morals on wildly implausible metaphysical assumptions. You can instead adopt the more secular or naturalistic value system that comes from understanding what works to help creatures cooperate and thrive together.
Yes, right. Yeah, this is definitely really interesting that or why still people they stick to their beliefs. But since we are talking about reasoning, there is another method that you explain in the book, which was really interesting as well, collaborative inquiry.
Yes. So this is a process I discovered teaching philosophy. When I first started teaching, I thought I had all the answers, or at least I was supposed to have all the answers. And so I taught in a way that kind of presumed that I was the expert and the students were supposed to learn from me. And what I found is that that was not a good formula for creating a vital learning environment. And so I threw out my assumptions of expertise and I started going to class just saying, hey guys, here's a really difficult philosophical problem. I don't know what to think about it. What do you think? And together we approach the problem together and we'd assimilate insights from many different points of view, some religious, some secular, some conservative, some liberal. And if you create the right environment where people feel like they're working together to deepen their understanding, to inquire, to find the truth, and to enrich their worldviews, if you create that environment, this inquiry, collaborative inquiry, can be enormously uplifting and educating. I think it's a wonderful approach to learning and building community. And so at Carnegie Mellon University, where I work with a student group to build a kind of secular community around passion for honest inquiry. We just practice the art of honest inquiry and learning and deepening our understanding on issue after issue after every week. We choose a different topic and we go deep on it by inquiring together and maintaining the right attitude so that we don't end up, if you keep the right attitude, it can be constructive and cooperative rather than competitive. And by practicing that art, I think we provide students with a secular fellowship that means a lot to them and helps them form a stable identity.
Exactly. And this is where I was heading basically, because as we were discussing that religions, they give people a base to come together and do activities. They can also do a collaborative inquiry whenever they want. That's also a solution.
And I like to say, Jitendra, that there's a real alternative to banding together around shared beliefs, and that's to band together around shared curiosity.
Exactly.
Or shared wonder, or shared willingness to desire to learn together. that works just as well, maybe even better, to bring people together, and it doesn't force you into morally compromising stubbornness.
Yes. I mean, I really like here Steven Pinker's point that generally people say that our ancestors, they were, those animals, I don't know, fighting, trying to survive, etc. But he puts a point that according to me, they were really clever apes, that they were trying to find out through reason different ways to survive. So many inventions. I mean, we think of fire, which is just a piece of cake, but it's not. It took so much effort and reason to maintain the fire, to keep it,
Yeah.
that it goes on.
And we're finding now that our hominid ancestors were remarkably clever creatures. We many of us were taught to think of Neanderthals as these kind of dumb, brutish cousins in the human family tree. It turns out they had brains much bigger than ours. They had sophisticated cultures, symbols, religious rites. They mourned their dead and gave them ritualistic burials. So there's a whole lot more that's intellectually and cognitively sophisticated and interesting in humanity's deep past than we've been led to believe, and it's an amazing thing. And yeah, I think Steve Pinker is right that the ability to reason things through is, in some way, it might well have been the trait that set us apart, which isn't to say that chimpanzees, say, one of our closest one of our closest primate cousins, it's not to say they can't problem solve. They're actually can be quite clever under the certain circumstances. But a collaborative kind of problem solving, a collaborative kind of, it seems to be peculiarly human. Human infants can collaborate together much more easily than adult chimpanzees. So there's something about the wiring of the human brain that inclines us in the direction of shared problem solving, collaborative problem solving. And it's looking more and more likely that particular mutation, that particular difference is really what set humanity on a radically transformative path. And of course, our creatures have since transformed the planet by using that very same capacity for reason. Not always for good, but often for good.
Exactly. I mean, we can simply look at even today, we can look at human children, right? That they are in their childhood, they are so much inquisitive. They ask so many questions, but then, as Richard Dawkins generally mentions, that through that indoctrination, people, they just, because of, again, can be belief, faith, or whatever, just suppress their curiosity, or it's the way the system is nowadays, that you suppress their curiosity, and then you just, working with sheep, as you also mentioned in the book, that they are following the same reason.
Yeah. Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so the question was, or since you already mentioned about the brain wiring in general, there we can go on to talk about mental immunity. But before that, so what are mind parasites, which is an important thing to understand why we need mental immunity?
Sure. So it sounds like a creepy, exotic concept, but it's actually just kind of a fun new way of thinking about bad ideas generally. So parasites require a host. Ideas require a host. Parasites can infect a body. Ideas can infect a mind. parasites can induce bodies to spread them to other bodies by sneezing, for example. And ideas can induce the minds that host them to spread them to other minds by proselytizing or teaching, for example. Furthermore, the wrong idea, just as certain parasites can harm the bodies that host them, certain ideas can harm the minds that host them. I give the example of the idea that it's a good idea to don an explosive vest and kill a bunch of infidels. That idea has been known to destroy the very mind that hosts it. And it's just one very clear example, but there are many, many, many ideas in our lives that push us in the direction of bad outcomes. And when you come to understand this, you realize that each and every one of our minds is full of what amount, essentially, to mind parasites. And then the problem becomes, how do you spot the bad ones? How do you spot the real mind parasites? And how do you remove them? How do you spot them before, when they first come along, when misinformation or bad ideas come along and you're encountering them for the first time? How do you spot them and say, sorry, you're not welcome here. I'm not going to believe you, right? Well, historically, we've used the concept of critical thinking to try to understand this process, but the concept of critical thinking is very crude and doesn't do much to help us become better at spotting bad ideas. I argue in the book that this emerging science of mental immunity, I call it cognitive immunology, is giving us much, much more precise tools for improving critical thinking and protecting minds against infectious and harmful ideas.
Right. And so, of course, we can, let's say, spot probably good and bad ideas somehow. So what is that mental immune system to spot these ideas?
Well, so it turns out mental immune systems are, well, I define the concept as the mind's entire infrastructure for spotting and removing bad ideas. And it turns out that many things that go by other names contribute to this capacity. So curiosity, fair-mindedness, discrimination. I mean here the ability to see differences, not the ability to treat people unfairly. So the ability to analyze an argument and find its weaknesses, that's the standard fare of critical thinking instruction. That's certainly part of it as well. So critical thinking skills matter. But also there are habits of mind and dispositions that impact our ability to spot and remove bad ideas. So all of these things contribute to mental immune, what I call mental immune function. And the trick is to understand how they work, how the system works, so that we can help it work better and prevent it from breaking down under stress.
Exactly. But then still some bad ideas, they can invade the immune system, right? How does that happen?
Well, so every mental immune system is imperfect. So nobody has a mind completely free of bad ideas. So we can all improve. And the problem is not entirely other people's problems. This is all of our problem. So if you come to just as the body's immune system has to strike a really interesting balance between it has to spot the harmful parasites and attack them, remove them, but it also needs to let in good microbes and nutrients without attacking them. If a body's immune system is too lazy, bad parasites invade and make you sick. If your body's immune system is hyperactive or gets too excited, it'll start attacking your body's own tissues And that results in some awful health outcomes also. So I like to say that the body's immune system has to inhabit kind of a Goldilocks zone, neither overactive nor underactive, but just right. Well, it turns out the mind's immune system also has to find a Goldilocks zone. You need to be suspicious enough to spot false ideas and screen them out, but you need to be trusting enough to let good ideas in so that they can enrich your worldview. How do you strike that balance? What's the right degree of trust and suspicion? And which things should we be skeptical of, and which things should we accept in a more trusting way? A healthy mental immune system manages that balance. But when the mind, there are all kinds of mental immune dysfunctions or disorders where the mind loses that ability to strike that proper balance, and then goes on to harm the mind itself, or at least not do its job to protect the mind.
Right. And so here, of course, when we are talking about bad ideas, we are still talking about either the inherent properties in the humans, can be biases, the different motivated reasoning, etc. Right. Or it can be, the belief system in general that we get from the society. But yes, go ahead.
Well, yeah, the way I like to explain this is that ideas have properties, and these properties are not just purely arbitrary or in the eyes of the beholder. So whether or not the sky is blue is true, there's a fact about that, and I can either validate that fact or falsify that fact by looking at the sky and seeing whether it's blue. So ideas have the property of truth or its lack, but ideas also have properties that can be harmful, objectively harmful, or objectively beneficial. The idea that human beings have rights, I would argue, is objectively beneficial. The idea that my race is superior to your race, that's a really bad idea. That's an idea that has caused an enormous amount of harm in the world. And that's no mere opinion, that's a fact. So ideas have properties, and what philosophers have been doing for a long time is saying we can examine ideas and through collaborative inquiry, assess those ideas. We can mark those qualities, those properties, so as to achieve a more objective assessment of the idea's merits. In other words, you can bring something like the scientific attitude to the assessment of even moral beliefs. You can bring scientific attitude to the assessment of religious beliefs. You can bring the scientific attitude to the assessment of political beliefs and arrive at more rational and more beneficial, more useful ways of thinking about things. And we can all do this. We can all learn how to do it. It's not rocket science. And the book explains how each and every one of us can master this so that we can bring about a far more peaceful and prosperous world.
Exactly. One thing is that, which I was thinking that, for example, science in general, it changes over time. It updates itself. And this is what we are talking about when we are saying reason's fulcrum, or the different way we can reason. And if your reason is good, I should submit. I should say that, okay, your reason is good, and I accept it. So here we are also in general talking about that that change which happens over time, right? Means that in general we are limited in our thinking. I mean, of course, let's say if we talk about women's right, 200 years back, I think even if no one will think about talking about this topic, right? But then 100 years back, people started talking about it, and it's when a revolution happened and women get vote to write in the US, right?
Good example.
So that means it's still, it seems like that it's time limited, right? And are we fine with that, or we need to refine, or we need something more in our approach? Because belief systems, they give that permanence, right? They say that today is the same and after 1,000 years it'll be the same. or I mean, they update, but may not be that much. But the fact that when it comes to reasoning, which changes over time.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What's your thought on it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. If I think I understand it, but tell me if I get this wrong. But so if I believe something like human beings have rights, I'm believing something that's supposed to be true, not just of now, but for all of human time. When I say human beings have rights, I presumably I mean that we had them long before we came to recognize them, and that we will continue to have them. And or you might even think that human beings would have rights even once we're all extinct, right? So the moral claims like human beings have rights have a timeless quality, or almost an eternal quality. But beliefs are also brains encoded in the brain, and they affect behavior as long as they are active, and they can bring about change as long as they're active, maybe through a certain period of history. And then sometimes the ideas that have proven useful in the past, it's time to let go of them and move on to even better alternatives. So the idea that, the idea that God will protect his chosen people, that idea probably helped the Hebrew tribes. It probably gave courage to the Hebrew tribes whose adventures were described in the Old Testament. It was adaptive, it was useful, it paid benefits to its believers. But we've reached a point in history where the idea that this tribe is God's chosen tribe and the other ones are not, where that idea is really toxic, where that idea causes conflict and inhumanity and a great deal of harm. I think we've reached a point in human history where it's best to let go of ideas like that. So there's an example of an idea that may have been useful in some limited sense, at least to certain people for a time, but we've reached a point where it's best to let go of it. It could be that in the future, we need to replace the idea that human beings have rights with a more nuanced concept. I don't think it'll disappear entirely, but I think it might be replaced by a more subtle idea or set of ideas. And we need to be open to that if we want to continue learning and growing as moral beings. Does that speak to your question?
Yes, it does. And that also shows that openness to reason can really shows that, or it can really show the importance of, or that will be growing tomorrow, that it will be in favor of everyone rather than, sticking to certain beliefs.
Well said.
Yeah, and the other interesting point that you mentioned is the in the book is morality without brains. Like you imagine that if on a planet there is no brain, and what would morality help rocks to survive or something? Yeah, that was.
Yeah, so you're mentioning a thought experiment where
Yes.
So imagine the universe before, where it's just rocks and space dust, and say planets haven't even formed, and no life forms have evolved. Ask yourself whether any rearrangement of the elements of this universe could possibly make it better or worse. If it's by definition not harming any creature with a mind, any creature with consciousness, then it's hard to imagine how it could be better or worse. And that seems to show us that morality is rooted in the experience of conscious creatures, and that the whole point of morality is to improve the experience of conscious creatures.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the improvement, of course, we need vaccine for the mental immune system, so for them to recover. So what would be that vaccine for mental immunity?
Right. So the story here is that the germ theory of disease came along in, like, I think the 17th century, and all of a sudden it opened scientists' eyes to one of the main sources of human misery. And we learned how to slow and sometimes halt the spread of dangerous microbes, and we've saved literally hundreds of millions of lives. And then the science of immunology came along, and we learned how to hack the body's immune system with vaccines to strengthen them against novel or new viruses. And once again, we've saved hundreds of millions of lives that way. I'm imagining a world where our understanding of the mind's immune system and our understanding of mind parasites is advanced enough to spare us from the ravages of infodemics, of the viral spread of toxic nonsense of one kind or another. So imagine a future where we not only have the tools of cognitive hygiene, the mental equivalent of washing your hands so you don't catch mind bugs from other people. Not just that, but also that we have something like mind inoculants or mind vaccines that we can use to strengthen the mental immune systems of future generations. So imagine if the education system of the future equipped every young person with next level critical thinking skills. I mean, we want to do that anyway. Everybody who knows what we mean by critical thinking support that goal. The problem is that, again, the concept of critical thinking is too simple, too crude. But the idea that the mind can have an immune reaction to troubling information, and sometimes an immune overreaction to troubling information. Once we understand that, we can begin designing mind vaccines that protect us against cognitive contagion. So in the book, I argue that the famous Socratic method is one of the most powerful mind inoculants ever invented, and that we can learn from the master philosopher Socrates, and by modulating his Socratic method, we arrive at something that can arguably be called a mind vaccine, something that might just spare future generations the ravages of cognitive contagion.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and now, since of course we are almost at the end, the question was that where does in general scientific method, which I'm saying that in terms, or what I mean by scientific method is that the way we inquire with using empirical evidence, right? Mm-hmm. Where does scientific method in general lacks in reasoning?
I'm sorry, where does it, what?
Where does scientific method lacks in reasoning?
Lacks?
Lacks, yeah. Like, what does it lack, or what do we need to add in scientific method for reasoning?
Gotcha. So what we think of today as science is a certain kind of disciplined inquiry that determines what the facts are. So the mission of science, as we understand it today, is to figure out what is and how what is works. The mission of science is to understand the facts. But there are also many important ideas that aren't factual in any straightforward sense. Our beliefs about right and wrong, our beliefs about how best to organize our political systems. These are ideas, it's also really important to get them right. And at least on standard conceptions of science, science can't help us answer those questions. In the book, I argue that we can and we need to expand our concept of science so that we can bring its disciplined methods to bear on the most divisive moral and political and religious questions also. And the key to doing that is to understand the concept of reason that I spell out in the later chapters of the book, because it turns out we can reason in what amount to scientifically responsible ways about all topics. And when you understand that, you can actually bring a scientific mindset to the problem of how do I live a good life? How do I become a good person? How do I promote love and compassion? All of those questions begin to yield to the scientific attitude if you understand what I call the way of inquiry.
Yes. So as a rational thinker, what gives you comfort? What do you do when you want to, or when you are seeking comfort?
Friends and family are very important for that. I try to practice gratitude. I think it's very easy to get caught up on negative things and to dwell on them again and again in your mind and kind of poison your own attitude. So I used to think obsessively about my shortcomings and about the problems in the world, and it led me to despair. But I learned to protect my own mental well-being by devoting a significant chunk of my time to focusing on the positive things, which are also out there. We often overlook them, and to reasons for hope. So I try not to turn a blind eye to the reasons for despair, but I definitely give a good amount of attention to reasons for hope. And I think that's a rationally justifiable way to keep your spirits up.
Then that definitely makes sense. So I generally do one thought experiment to, or this is like the way I think, that let's say that now people start reading Mental Immunity, and they get this rational thinking in general about their way of living, and humanity survives for another 1,000,000 years. Okay. The point is, then what will be, and of course, at least I hope, I'm optimistic here, that by that time philosophy and science might have answered, or must have answered, everything. So then what will be the role of philosophy and science? I mean, what would be your comment?
I believe that the world is infinitely intricate, and so we will never exhaust the things worth investigating. And I think if you, I can look at my hand and just see, 4 fingers and a thumb, nothing interesting there. But then if I examine more closely, I start to see interesting differences in the skin color and lines in my skin. And if I pay attention in the right way, I can start to see stuff that's more fascinating. And I can zoom in on my fingernail or the tip of my fingernail. And the same thing can happen wherever I look, wherever we look. If you bring interest to the world, it will always prove interesting and surprising. So I'm not worried that we'll run out of things to investigate. I think there's an inexhaustible supply of things to study.
Yes, I remember one discussion where someone asked Christopher Hitchens, what do you think of the future of religion, whether we eliminate religion from the world? And he said that I would never want that, because if the religion is gone, then with whom I will discuss. So
That sounds like Hitchens, yeah.
Okay, so this was an interesting discussion. So what else do you recommend apart from Mental Immunity and How to Talk to Science Denier from Lee McIntyre?
Thank you. Well,
yes.
I'm grateful for you helping me raise awareness of my book. I worked very hard on it, and I think there's a lot in there that can help people if they devote the time to it. So I hope people will check out the book. If you're interested in this science I call cognitive immunology, check out the website of my new research institute, the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, where we're actually working to figure out how to prevent cognitive contagion. We want to induce herd immunity to the worst ideas so that we can all flourish together. And we think we have the new science that can help us get there. Our institute needs partners, collaborators, and financial backers. So check it out at cognitivimmunology.net and let me know if you can help.
Perfect. And so what else is coming from your side apart from, are you writing another book or thinking about it?
Hard to say right now. There's so many things competing for my time and attention. It's we'll see. There's a lot of fun opportunities facing me right now, but I have to say, check back with me in a year or two and I'll see.
Sure, perfect. Okay, so thank you for the great discussion. I enjoyed a lot.
Thank you, Jitendra. So did I.